Alrighty, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Wall Dropping History. I am your host, Mr. Waldrop, and I wanted to take today, I haven't done a show in a while, right? I've been teaching summer school. That's eating up a lot of my time, and it makes it where I can't do the show at noon because I'm doing summer school.
Yeah, I cannot see, it's just black.
Anyway, so I decided I needed to do an episode, right? I realized that probably there's no students tuning in, and that's fine, right? Like, it's fine, no students tuning in. I didn't schedule it. It's not planned. If you want to watch it later, that's fine. If you happen to stumble upon it and want to leave some comments, feel free, and I'll address them in the show. But I felt like I needed to talk about some events. And I needed to go back and address another episode that kind of got deleted by Facebook. I did an episode on Black Wall Street, and I wanted to share it with a friend of mine, Kathleen, if she's watching. I wanted to share it with a friend of mine, and I found that the hour-and-a-half episode had been chopped all the way down to like 18 minutes. I don't know what happened. Facebook has been very YouTube has been very frustrating with this. But I wanted to do it again and give my thoughts on this. Hopefully, because I'm not including a whole lot of songs and media from other sources, it's not going to take it down or chop it up. We'll see. I don't know. We'll see. But anyways, so I wanted to give my thoughts on the matter, what's going on in the world today. And of course, obviously, the big thing that's going on right now is the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, obviously, it's not a new movement, right? Black Lives Matter has been going on for years. But it seems like it's really exploded right now, right? I mean, it seems like it's just kind of taken on a life of its own. We have protests out all over the place. There's the one over there on Segan, all over the country, right? And of course, you know, we still have the pandemic going on, so it's kind of a really daunting time to have to deal with this if you're a protester, to go out and protest, you know, worrying that, you know, your life could be at risk. And of course, that's something that a lot of protesters are having to deal with as well. And so I wanted to go back and address a couple things. And of course, obviously, this all begins with the George Floyd situation, right? The I can't breathe aspect of it. And of course, we've all watched the video, and I'll be honest, it took me a few days to watch it. I kind of knew what I was getting into, and it was painful, right? I mean, tears coming down my eyes. I mean, all I can think about is, I'm a very empathetic person, right? And all I kept thinking about is imagining that moment, right? Where you're sitting there, and at some point in time, the knowledge had to have entered his brain. And you can hear him screaming, you know, I don't want to die. It had to enter his brain that he's not going to survive this encounter. He's not going to make it, right? And all I kept thinking is, you know, that horror, the horror of sitting there thinking, am I dying for nothing? Like, what was the point? Why am I dying right now? You know, will my life matter? Will it matter to anybody? And of course, obviously, even though he won't know it, I'm sorry. Even though he won't know it, his life does matter, right? It's really sparked a lot of protest, and it does feel like something is happening, right? Our country is going to change as a result of his death, right? And of course, you know, my first thought is, well, why did it have to come to that? And you know, and I've seen, I didn't even plug her. I'm not even going to say her name, but there's a conservative pundit that goes out, and she kind of just rips apart George Floyd's character. Obviously, he's not alive to defend himself, but she just absolutely tears into him. You know, I've debated a couple people that said, well, you know, he's not. This person is not justifying what the cops did. They're just saying don't make him a martyr, right? But here's the thing. I can't sit there and say, well, I'm not saying that murder is wrong and that this person had it coming, but let me spend 18 minutes describing why this person had it coming. You can't do that. It doesn't work that way. I don't care how many times you keep saying, I'm not saying he has it coming. You can't then continue to explain why he had it coming, right? And let me tell you, the cops didn't know that. Anything that you find about George Floyd, right, digging up his past, the cops didn't know it. They're not psychic. They just showed up and, y'all know the story, right? So I thought to myself, well, okay, fine. If you want to sit there and focus on that, what about Philandro Castile, right? I mean, we got a guy who's sitting there in his car saying, officer, and of course you can go watch the video. You can read the transcription. He says, officer, I have a gun in my glove compartment, right? And the cop says, don't go for his gun. And he goes for his wallet in his back pocket because the cop told him to, right? Said, obviously, license and registration. And they pump a bunch of bullets into his chest. And the thing that's so crazy is, and I'm not sure how many times I can watch this video because it's really tough, but was hearing his daughter in the backseat of that vehicle. And the mom is understandably angry. They just killed her boyfriend, the father of her child. And by the way, if you ever hear about this guy, a lot of people called him Mr. Rogers with dreads. I mean, just this upstanding citizen, great guy, a lifetime of public service, no checker. I mean, there's nothing you're going to find on this guy, right, that denotes that he deserved this. Not that George Floyd did either, but you're not going to find anything in his past, right? Gets pumped full of bullets, but listening to his daughter, listening to her in the backseat of the car, trying to calm her mom, saying, Mom, calm down, because she thinks that they're about to shoot her mom too. I can't even imagine the psychology involved, right? What that girl's view of the world is going to be for the rest of her life, right? And of course, there's the Breonna Taylor story, right? So, I mean, the point of what I'm getting at is there's too many of these cases, right? I mean, whether or not you want to make George Floyd your rationale, or your method, or what is sparking it for you, there's too many cases, right? Here we got Breonna Taylor, right? I think she's 22 years old. She's a medic, EMT person. I mean, she's saving lives. She's a great person, right? They break in her house with a no-knock order and shoot her 8 times while she's in her bed. And I can't help but thinking about, and somebody else posted this on Facebook and I stole it, but it's so true, right? It's not just disturbing that they shot her 8 times because she was in the wrong house. It's like, you're telling me that if they were in the right house, their plan of action was to shoot it up? You see so many videos of white people with weapons, sometimes guns, and they walk away alive, right? I want to see that. I want to see some occasions where the black person has a weapon and walk. I mean, whether you're talking about Tamir Rice or whatever the situation, where they walk out alive, and of course, obviously, she's not going to be around to finish her life. And I had these slides out of order. And it's absolutely tragic. So if that's the case, right, if you want to make her your martyr, go for it. But the point is, there's too many of these cases. It's too easy to find. It's everywhere, right? And of course, we also have this problem of the way that our criminal system is working, right? And I know the Patriot Act is where I kind of stole this part from, but it's true. We watched it last night, the Lewis episode, and it's like, why is it we couldn't afford to get medical equipment to our doctors during a pandemic? But he makes the joke that we got cops walking around dressed like Master Chief. It's like, when it comes to policing our country, the budget is wide and it is unlimited, right? But when it comes to actually things like healthcare, things that everybody has to have, it's like, well, we got a ration. We got a penny pinch every chance we can get, right? And, it all kind of goes back to the way that our country has been aimed at things like the war on drugs. And I want you to listen. This is a former Richard Nixon domestic policy chief, a guy named John Ehrlichman. And he says, this is his quote. He says, you know what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black. But by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt their communities. Ehrlichman says, we could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Wow. Wow. I mean, it worked. I mean, and this is not some, like, conspiracy theory or something. Some guy sitting down in a basement trying to tell up some story about, you know, how Hillary Clinton's running a sex shop out of a pizza parlor. It's not one of those gibberish stories. This is an admission. He's bragging about it, right? So we kind of know the genesis of it. Of course, obviously, the war on the black community goes back as far back as the nation's history itself, right? 400 years from slavery to Jim Crow, so on and so forth, right? You can go see my episode on the lynching, right? That talks a lot about that, and it breaks it down. And one of the things I think back to is, and I show this when I teach my class, is I show them that clip of the judgment at Nuremberg, right? And it's got this really great scene in it where the main character's on trial, and he's going on this long diatribe about, you know, a lot of these people that are defending these Nazi criminals are saying, well, you know, they didn't know. You know, and he makes this beautiful speech where he said, you know, where were they when these Jews were being drug out of their homes? Where were they when they called out to us in the middle of the night? You know, we saw them going to the camps, and then we saw the piles of dead bodies coming out. You know? And then he makes this really great quote that'll always stick with me. And it says, if we didn't know, it's because we didn't want to know. Right? And that's kind of the situation that I feel like we're in right now. At this point, if you're not aware of the problems we have in our criminal system, you don't want to know. You have decided, I do not want to know. I have no desire to know about it. Right? And so that's kind of the situation we're at. And so I kind of wanted to break it down really for the people that want to know. And so, you know, you see a lot of people talking about, like, why Black Lives Matter? Shouldn't all lives matter? And I saw this today. A friend of mine shared it with me. And I thought it was a really great way to word it. And it says, if my wife comes to me in obvious pain and asks, do you love me? And I answer, well, I love everybody. Sure, it's truthful, but it's hurtful and cruel in the moment. If a coworker comes to me upset and says, my father just died, and a response of, well, everyone's parents die, although it's truthful, would be hurtful and cruel in the moment. So when a friend speaks up in a time of obvious pain and hurt and says, Black Lives Matter, and you hear a response of, well, all lives matter, although it is truthful, it is hurtful and cruel in the moment. And I think that's a great way to put it. And that kind of comes to this, right? The Drew Brees situation. Let me tell you this. Drew Brees is probably one of my favorite athletes, mostly because he was a short dude and a professional athlete in kind of a hometown. And he took a team that, you know, for years and years was called the Aints and took them to a Super Bowl, right? A hero, right? This is a guy that they said was washed up. His arm was done. He had major surgery. I have one NFL jersey, thanks to Costco. They were selling really cheap Drew Brees jerseys, and that was the only jersey I owned. And I wore it every Sunday the Saints played. It was my only jersey, and he was my favorite NFL player, right? Because he kind of, between him and Sean Payton, I felt like he took my home team and brought it to prominence, right? It's kind of the same reason for the longest time I was a huge fan of Cam Newton. I'm an Auburn guy, by the way. But he gave us our first championship, right? I mean, I'll never forget that, right? So, he gets on and he makes that comment of, I'll never agree with anybody disrespecting the flag of the United States of America. And let me tell you this, at its core, I understand what he's saying. Because let me tell you this, when it first happened, I didn't like it. When I saw all these athletes protesting, Colin Kaepernick not standing for the anthem, it was alarming. It was I didn't like it. You know, my first thought was the thought that I think a lot of people had, which is pick a different way. If you're going to protest police brutality, pick some other way to do it. That's not the way. Like, this is the national anthem is supposed to be a time in which we all come together and celebrate the country. And LeBron James says it, and he says, you literally don't understand why Cap was on one knee. It has nothing to do with disrespecting the flag or our soldiers, men and women who keep our land free. And let me tell you, I had to learn. I had to learn and listen. I had to listen to the black community and really learn that it's not about disrespecting the flag. That's got nothing to do with it. That's not the narrative. It's not disrespecting the anthem. And let me tell you this. I should have brought up this. It was a quote I'd put on Facebook. But let me tell you, America's not the anthem. It's not. In fact, the anthem, the guy that wrote it, Francis Scott Key, he was a lawyer who used to argue on behalf of people trying to reclaim their slaves as property up north. He owned slaves. We talk about a guy that's not to be admired. Francis Scott Key, the guy that wrote the anthem, he is not to be admired, right? You know, and there's always that thing. Well, you know, you got to judge history on a curve. I don't buy that. Not on that one, right? Like, you know, legally, you know, there's a lot of places where you can go and mistreat animals, right? And there's a lot of places that do, you know, and a lot of the food that we eat is animals that are mistreated. I don't need history or somebody or someone to explain to me that slavery is wrong, right? Whether I have my own personal Christian faith that tells me it's wrong or just my own basic morality, it's wrong. We all know it's wrong. It's wrong, right? So I can never give the defense of, well, they didn't understand. Yeah, they understood slavery was wrong. There's no way. I'm not buying that. I refuse to accept that excuse, right? But if you look, Drew Brees, and these next two slides are out of order, Michael Thomas's teammate, who kind of called him out, posted this, and I want you to see the reaction of why. And this is what Drew Brees wrote. And he says, through my ongoing conversation with friends, teammates, and leaders in the black community, I realize this is not an issue about the American flag, and it's never been. We can no longer use the flag to turn people away or distract them from the real issues that face our black communities. We did this back in 2017, and I brought it back with my comments this week. We must stop talking about the flag and shift our attention to the real issues of systemic racial injustice, economic oppression, police brutality, and judicial and prison reform. We are at a crucial juncture in our nation's history. If not now, then when? We as a white community need to listen and learn from the pain and suffering of our black communities. We must acknowledge the problems, identify the solutions, and then put it into action. The black community cannot do it alone and will require all of us. And here's why I think this is so important. And it's so important because of this. The goal is to educate. The goal is to explain. The goal is to generate empathy, right? I'll tell you this. I'm accepting Drew Brees' apology because he took it a step that he didn't have to take it. He issued his apology, and that could have been enough. He could have just tried to let the wind blow over, but he even took it so far as to try to reach out to President Trump on social media to try to encourage him to do what he did. And I like to think that he did the same thing I did, which is to just be quiet and listen and learn, right? Because, I mean, ultimately, if we're not going to allow people to change and learn and grow, then what's the point, right? Like, what is the ultimate goal? You know, so that is something I think we have to be aware of and keep our eye on the prize, right? The eye on the prize is not revenge. It is to educate, right? It's to change the system, right? If somebody changes their mind and you don't allow them to change their mind, there will be no progress, right? You're basically going to tell people, well, you better go ahead and dig in and join your camp and stay in your camp, because it won't matter even if you do. You'll never be accepted back into society. So that's why it's so important that we allow people to change and to learn and to grow, right? So how does this happen? How did we get to here, right? How are we in a situation with so much bigotry in this country, right? It's 2020. Shouldn't bigotry be over by now? Shouldn't racism end? And this is me personally. This is the educator in me coming out that says it all starts in a classroom. If y'all know Miss Jones, who works up at Broadmoor, you know, she made a post that kind of prompted me to do all this, right? And she was talking about how can we all do our part, right? Our part to end systemic racism. And for educators, it really starts in the classroom. And one of the areas that I always am alarmed to find is the amount of segregation that still exists in schools, right? And we've all seen this, right? Classrooms with nothing but white kids and classrooms with nothing but black kids or minorities, right? I've taught at one of those. I still teach at one of those. It's just ingrained into our system. But let me tell you this, it's not helping anybody. School segregation is not helping anybody, right? Nobody benefits from it. White kids don't benefit from it, Asian kids don't benefit from it, and black kids absolutely do not benefit from school segregation, right? It obviously harms black kids the most because now they're starting off behind. But let me tell you, it's not doing white kids any favors either. Because if you put them in this entrapped environment where they're never able to experience any kind of diversity, and then they go out into the world and they experience diversity, they don't know what to do with it. How many people do you think just recently, because I've seen a lot of these posts going around on Facebook and social media, where people are losing their jobs because they're posting this ridiculous racist crap on social media. Heck, I thought Drew Brees was going to lose his job. And then you ask yourself, like, how? You know, I mean, how's this still happening? And it's not helping the white population, right? And, you know, I kind of think back to, you know, if you think about it from the standpoint of, I want America's best and brightest to achieve, right? And I always make this joke in class, but it's true. If I have to have a brain surgery, right, or if I'm in critical condition, I don't want the whitest doctor working on me. I want the best doctor working on me, right? Not the whitest. And that's one of the problems where it hurts everybody. It hurts me, it hurts you, it hurts the whole country. Is when black people are not allowed to have their talents shared with the world, I lose. I lose out. I mean, for all I know, right now, I am sitting here talking to you, and 10 years from now, I get diagnosed with an, at the time, incurable disease, and I die from it. But if we had promoted some of our best and brightest black students, maybe one of them came up with a cure, and that doesn't happen, right? The fear of black equality really comes from a fear of ineptitude, right? I'm not afraid, you know, you often hear people, oh, they're going to give blacks all our jobs. I'm not afraid of a black taking my job. I work really hard at my job. I spend hours and hours and hours. Right now I'm doing summer school. I'm supposed to start at 8 o'clock and it's supposed to end at 2 o'clock. And let me tell you, I've been doing it round the clock, unlocking tests and helping students. I've done a couple of even helping them over the phone understand a lesson that they didn't understand. I don't do it just for the paycheck, right? I've never done it for just the paycheck. I want the best teachers around me, whether they're white or black, right? And if I'm doing my job and I'm passionate about it and I care about it, I'm not going to lose my job, right? That's not going to happen. I'm just going to be surrounded with a better quality support team around me, right? That's what's going to happen. Okay? I'll still have my job. I'll still feed my family and support them. I'm not worried about that because I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Right? And if you're doing your job and you're doing it to the best of your ability, you're not going to lose your job. You're going to be fine. And let me tell you this, going back to segregation, I'm not from here. I'm not from Louisiana. And if you're watching, you're from somewhere else, keep in mind this is kind of directed to the Louisiana population. I'm from Alabama. And in case you didn't know, Alabama is the home of just about every major civil rights movement or major movie, whether you're sitting down to watch Selma or Just Mercy or a documentary on Rosa Parks, or if you've ever read To Kill a Mockingbird, it's like the one thing that seems to be in plentiful supply in Alabama is the exportation of civil rights leaders, right? It's huge in Alabama, right? And even me, with my Alabama sensibilities, who grew up all over Alabama, if you live in Alabama, I probably lived there or lived near you. Even when I came to Louisiana, my first thought was, wow, these schools are segregated. Wow, it's like they're not even pretending here. Wow, I mean, it blew my mind. How? How did it happen? How is it even worse here in Louisiana? Let me tell you why it's even worse in Louisiana than it is in Alabama. And this enters this guy right here, Bobby Jindal. And maybe you don't know who he is. I didn't even know who he was till I got here. And he implemented something called the voucher program. And it's basically a scenario where you can use public tax dollars to send your kid to private schools. And in doing so, there's a lot of arguments for it, of freedom of choice and stuff like that, religious reasons. I kind of get that. But its core, the vast majority of these public schools, at its core, or the reason why a lot of parents send them, is to segregate. They don't want their kids going. Where I used to teach Broadmoor, there's a lot of white kids in the neighborhood around it. Lots of them. But they don't go to my school. They weren't there. They were off at private school. Right? I used to have this funny thing where I sit there and I would tell my students, like, what percentage of America do you think is black? And they'd say, 80%. 80%? You think 80% of America is black? Oh, yeah. It's like a little over 13%. Blew their mind. What percentage of Louisiana is black? Oh, that's got to be 90%. 90% of Louisiana is black. Try about a third. About a third of Louisiana is black. And immediately my kids are like, Mr. Walters, you got to be wrong. Where are they? I said, kids, for every class, every school like the one you're sitting in, there's at least 2 private schools where they send all the white kids. If you really want to know the demographics, I want you to go to Walmart and just sit there and look around. Those are the people that live in your community. Those are the people that live around you. It's mostly white people, right? But you would never know it because they're all at private school. And let me tell you, it's not helping our schools at all. It ain't helping the public schools. It's not helping the private schools. Nobody's winning. No one is winning from this voucher system. There's no winners. It's just all losers. All right? When you have segregation, everyone loses. It's just a matter how much you lose. So then ask the question that I always have is, which is why? Right? It's always the question I have, which is why. Why do we allow it to happen? Why do we continue to do what we know is not working? Why do we continue to have so much bigotry in 2020? Why does it still exist? Ahmaud Arbery. We saw it, right? He's running around, jogging, and he gets gunned down like a wild animal. I thought I was watching a trailer for the next episode of The Purge. It was disgusting, right? I mean, just hunted like an animal, right? As we speak right now, thousands of kids sitting in cages at our border. How are we allowing this to happen? How do we allow it to just happen? It's 2020. Aren't we supposed to be working towards ending this? Let me tell you why this happens. Let me tell you why segregation in schools is allowing this to happen. Because when you have segregation and you're not experiencing other people of different races and cultures and so on and so forth, you are susceptible to all manner of what people tell you about them, right? Like, let's say an alien race came down tomorrow, and I'm watching the news, and everything that the news tells me is that these aliens are evil and they're trying to kill everybody. My first assumption would be, oh man, I got to grab the kids, we got to hide. You know, I would just believe, if every news outlet is telling me that these aliens are evil and bad, I just believe it, right? There's a lot of people right now that have a whole lot of different varying racist views. It's a spectrum, right? There's the people that have all the way up to the neo-Nazis and the Proud Boys and so on and so forth. All the way down to somebody who just honestly, you know, that small, teeny tiny little bit of racism. Like maybe it's just something that they believe that, what's a good example? That most black people are violent, right? One of the smaller ends, right? They're willing to be friends with black people and give them a better chance, but they just hold certain beliefs about what's wrong with the black community that's not based on reality, right? So why is this allowed to happen? Why is segregation in schools so important, right? And by the way, Robert Abernathy and all them, they understood it, right? They got why it was so important. Let me tell you why. Because when you keep the races segregated, when you keep people separated, you can turn a human into an object. When my shoes get old and worn out, I throw them away. And I feel no remorse. None. I don't feel any sorrow. I'm not shedding one tear because I threw my shoes away. I don't care. Doesn't bother me. Right? I will not lose 1 ounce of sleep. The goal of bigotry is to turn humans into objects. Because if it's a human, it's really hard. It's hard for me to see what happened to Ahmaud Arbery or George Floyd or Breonna Taylor. It's hard because my first reaction is to think that's a person. They had hopes and fears and dreams and goals, and their life is gone. They'll never get to have those dreams or goals fulfilled. I don't care if my shoe had ambition. Doesn't bother me. Because it's a shoe. Ahmaud Arbery had goals. I'm sure he did. Philandro Castile, he had dreams. I'm sure he wanted to see his daughter grow up. I'm sure he did. But we try to turn humans into objects. One of the things I make it a great importance to me is to make sure that I fight to make sure that my kids have inclusion in their life. If somebody goes up to my kids and says black people are bad or immigrants are bad, you know, that immigrants are all murderers and rapists, they go, no, they're not. No, they're not. That's not true. I have friends, right? I have people in my life of diversity. That's not true, right? I know better. We know better, right? I decided to fly around the world and make my wife a different race, different ethnicity, different culture, different language, everything, right? I mean, opposite end of the planet. I brought her home, and my children now get to benefit from that different world culture, that different world view. And if somebody says to my kids, immigrants are all murderers and rapists, they know better. Okay? They have one living in their home. Right? Somebody that wakes up in the morning and gets them ready for school and packs them lunch and tucks them in at bed at night. Right? They know better. This is my personal quote. I hope they put this on my tombstone. Right? And that is, bigotry is a disease. Diversity is the inoculation to bigotry. That's the only way we ever get through this. We've got to have diversity in our life. That's the only way. Now, I saw this on Facebook. Let me bring up this poll. And it says, when were you taught about the Tulsa Race Massacre in your American high school? And let me tell you this, I wasn't taught about it. I was not taught about this in college, and I took classes on civil rights and black history. And I wasn't taught this. I knew nothing about it. Do you know how I found out about this story? There was a teacher, and if you're watching, you went to Broadmoor, you know this guy, a guy named Mr. McFarland. He's a retired teacher who came back and subbed because he liked teaching. He told me about it. And let me tell you this, when he first told me about it, my first reaction is, oh no, that's not right. There's no way. There's no way that what you're telling me about this story about Black Wall Street could be true, because if it was true, this would be like teaching the Civil War and forgetting to mention Abraham Lincoln, or teaching civil rights, or teaching the American Revolution and forgetting to mention the shot heard around the world. How could you do it? Like, how do you tell the story of black history and you leave this out? How? How's it possible? He's got to be wrong. Everything he told me about it, the more I read about it, the more I looked into it, the more I researched it, he didn't tell me enough. It was worse than he described. And so let me tell you this right now. If you don't know about the Tulsa Massacre and you want to follow along, I'm going to show you what I teach in my class. Okay? Now, when I teach it in my class, there's questions embedded, and obviously I'm not in front of a class, so I remove the questions. But I have a little monologue whenever I teach this class, and I always say, students, what I'm about to teach you today, I have a list of standards. It's printed right over there on my wall. It's not a standard. It's not going to be on any state test. You're not going to see this on the LEAP test. You don't actually have to know this. Not from that standpoint of your grades. But let me tell you why you do need to know this. Because this is definitive proof. Definitive proof that so many of the stereotypes that you hear about the black community are in fact a lie. It's a lie. And I want you to hear about why it's a lie. So after slavery was abolished and the Civil War ended, many Southern blacks began to migrate, and this was known as the Great Migration. They were escaping lands of living in former slave lands, Jim Crow, right? They're getting out of Dodge. Many black people are going, look, I don't want to live in Jim Crow. I don't want to live where all the lynchings are. I'm getting out, right? And this was known as the Great Migration. Now, a lot of them decided to move to this place called Greenwood near Tulsa. It was a historic freedom colony, and this is in Oklahoma. It soon became one of the most prominent concentrations of African American business in the United States during the 20th century. Now, it all starts with this guy right here, a guy named O.W. Gurley. Now, around the start of the 20th century, he is a wealthy black landowner from Arkansas, and he decides to buy up a ton of land just in the northern part of Tulsa. And he decides, I'm going to make this land really cheap for black people. And he said he wanted plots of land that was only to be sold to colored, right? So it's cheap land so that black people can own, right? You know, one of the things I think about, and I saw this in a really viral video, maybe you've seen it, is it was a response to white people saying, well, they're tearing down their own community. To which this black lady said, this ain't ours. We don't own anything. How many black people own businesses or own property, right? And so she said, you know, we don't own anything. And of course, you can watch it, and if you want me to, I can leave it in the show notes. It's really powerful. I'm not going to show, it's got a lot of profanity there at the end. but it's powerful, right? You know, it makes the argument of, like, imagine you're playing Monopoly, and for 400 years they get to go around the board, collecting go money and buying up property. Then you get to go around the board, only when it's your turn to go around the board, any money you make, they're going to burn it, right? And today we're going to learn about that, right? So, many that moved here had Native American ancestors. They were able to use that connection to help set up their community, and there they thrived socially and economically. And I would always ask the question, why do you think Native Americans would help black people set up a community? Of course, the obvious answer is, who understands better than Native Americans the oppression of white America, right? I mean, who gets it? I mean, you know, I often ask my kids, and I somewhat steal this from a Chris Rock joke, but you know, it's true. Like, I've gone my entire life, I've never gone into like a Denny's and seen a family of Native Americans, right? So they help them out. They start to establish their city of Greenwood, right? Now, as Tulsa grows, many begin to see Tulsa as beginning to be two different cities. The part of the city that would become Greenwood was often called Little Africa by the locals. By 1921, the area had more than 10,000 black people living there, right? Greenwood had everything you could ask for. It had stores, markets, banks, schools, libraries, hospitals, even a thriving nightlife. And the people of Greenwood were proud of what they built. And I want you to wrap your brain around this. Okay? There's a white side of town and a black side of town, which a lot of cities have, right? Baton Rouge is no exception. The black side was the good side. All the poor people lived over on the white side. The black side is booming, right? People are making money. They're walking around. They're dressed nice. It's a great place to live, right? And I often ask my students, like, if you were alive in that time, would you move to Tulsa? Heck yes. In the 1990s, oil becomes a huge commodity, right? I'm sorry, 1910s. Oil becomes a huge commodity. Part of that is the Industrial Revolution. You got machines, you got vehicles. Well, in a fortunate turn of events, an area just north of Tulsa was discovered to be rich in oil. Because of this, the economy begins to explode, right? If you think of this as Wakanda, well, they just found their vibranium, right? They're sitting on a giant pile of vibranium, right? And they begin to build their own Wall Street. And they're doing quite well, right? Business is booming. People are making money. Everything is just turning up, you know, roses, right? Then enters this guy named J.B. Stratford. Now, seeing what is going on in Greenwood, J.B. Stratford would decide to join. He's an eager young entrepreneur who wants to thrive on Black Wall Street. He would go on to become the wealthiest businessman, white or black, in the entire city. All right? Now, Stratford would buy more land to be sold only to black people. And he would build the hotel that would become the largest black-owned hotel in America, right here in Tulsa. He saw it as important to build a place where black people could prosper, right? So you got these two big dogs working together to try to build something, right? They're using their wealth and building community. In May of 1921, a 19-year-old shoeshine boy named Dick Rowland is accused of assaulting a 17-year-old white girl named Sarah Page. Despite no evidence, they had no evidence against this guy. And even the girl, Sarah Page, saying, no, this didn't happen. Rawlins was taken into custody by the locals. Many of the locals feared that this dude is about to get lynched. They're about to lynch him. A group of armed black men decide to rush the police station, and they find a crowd of whites waiting for them. A gunfight begins to break out, and 12 people are killed, 10 white and 2 black. News of the event spread across thousands as whites began to rampage through the black neighborhoods that night and the next day. Okay? Word gets out. And I have a video. I'm not going to show it because I really don't want YouTube to take this down, but I would have shown it in class. And it kind of breaks down, shows some footage. I'll leave it in the show notes if somebody asks me to. I'll be sure to do that. But anyway, they began killing men and women. They burned and looted stores and homes. Right? I mean, over this event, they just start laying waste to all of the community. A lot of these people didn't even know what was going on. They're literally bombing it, right? Now, this is called a race riot in the local news. It ain't a riot. They're literally bombing the city to the ground. Over 300 black people are murdered, making it one of the worst cases of violence in U.S. history. This is actual footage. Over 35 blocks are burnt to the ground. More than 800 people are admitted to hospitals, and more than 6,000 residents are arrested and detained for many days. And guess what? It's all the black residents. Their city had been destroyed. In one night, over one boy who was falsely accused, over a shootout of 10 men, an entire city is burnt to the ground. They just used it as an excuse. That's why they arrested Dick Rowland. They wanted an excuse. Anything they could use to justify destroying this city. They began to try to rebuild from the ashes, but the damage has been done. Many survivors left out of fear of future attacks. Over 10,000 people are left homeless. I would often ask my students, if you were there, would you move? Or would you stay and try to rebuild? And let me tell you, the vast majority said, we're out. We're out. Mission accomplished. Their city had been destroyed out of fear, jealousy, pettiness. Let me tell you, nobody wanted definitive proof that if black people left to their own devices could possibly succeed. And their city was destroyed. Now, it was believed that the people of Tulsa conspired to cover it up. Hardly any mention of the events made the local papers. Can you imagine? Half your city gets bombed to the ground and doesn't even make hardly the local papers. It seems as though all the residents all worked together to collude and pretend that the event never happened. In 1996, a bipartisan commission looked into the events and discovered that the city of Tulsa itself conspired with the white mob against the black population there. It was all planned, all from the get-go. Now, as a form of reparations, the city offered some of the descendants of the victims scholarships. I mean, they don't get that generational wealth they would have had from the oil or the businesses or any of that stuff, but you get a scholarship. They did try to develop economic growth in Greenwood. They made a memorial in the park to Tulsa over the riot victims. I mean, hey, it's something, I guess. But can you imagine how much generational wealth to the black community was stripped away from them in one night? $600 businesses, 21 churches, 21 restaurants, 30 grocery stores, 2 movie theaters, 6 private airplanes, a hospital, a bank, a post office, schools, libraries, law offices. They even had a functional bus system. Gone in one day. This is an image taken after it. It's painful. It's hard to watch. It's really, really hard to watch. Can you imagine? My brain can't wrap itself around. I'm an older brother. The amount of hate I would have in my heart for somebody to kill my brother. I can't even imagine. Think about this little boy. What do you think his life is going to be like for the rest of his life? That video I was talking about, that I didn't put in here because of the profanity, but she kind of ends it with, to be honest, they should be really, really happy that black people, and I count myself among them, we should all be really happy that they're seeking equality and not revenge. Because I'll be honest, somebody murdered my brother, my wife, my parents, my students, I'd want revenge. I would. It is quite the testament to the character and the quality of the humans that exist within the black community that all they want is to be treated equal. That's powerful. That's really, really powerful. Well, listen, that is it for me today for Wall Dropping History. Thank you so much for showing up, for your dedication, your education. Leave some thoughts in the comment section below. If there's anything you want to know more about, maybe something I didn't touch on, don't hesitate to ask. And I'll tell you, if I don't know it, I'll find out. I will go find out. But yeah, that's going to do it for today's episode of Wall Dropping History. Listen, thank y'all so much. I appreciate it. And really, until next time, goodbye.